Sabal, foodsafetyconsulting.com. Good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm doing very well. No complaints at all. It will be a crime.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, nobody wants to hear that anyway, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that we do here, and one of our rituals on Friday is for this chat is to say hello in the chat. Let us know where you're at in the world. Normally, I'm in Loveland, Colorado, but if you watch this, you can tell by my lovely background with the abstract painting here that I'm not in Loveland, Colorado. I'm actually in beautiful Des Moines, Iowa, and I don't say that sarcastically. If you've never been to Des Moines, it's a beautiful city, right in the middle of Iowa, really growing, huge financial and insurance hub for the United States. So happy to be here. Where are you at, Jose?
I'm home. A lot of work, even though that I helped my daughter move to Austin in
Uh-huh.
Texas, and I drove the 1,300 miles in a truck.
Ooh.
And then I was invited to speak in a conference for aquaculture in Dominican Republic,
Ooh.
and I also taught a segment 2 of the seafood hazard.
Nice.
So I've been traveling a little bit, but mostly home.
Right. It always embarrasses Jose when I do this, but I'm going to do it. If you have the opportunity to take a training course with Jose, and hit up his email here, and he is one of the best teachers out there. If you watch this chat, his enthusiasm and his knowledge come through everything. So I'm so happy to have him here and honored to share his information. So make sure and sign up for a class with Jose. We worked together in another company where he did a lot of the training courses. I don't think I ever saw a review of him that was not a 5 out of 5. So he's a rock star, guys. So let's
Experience.
yeah. So let's see if my chat is working here. I'll just put my location. There we go. So out in Colorado, the weather is turned now, but for the last 4 days, Jose, it's been like 100 degrees. Really, really atypical warm weather for this time of year. So we've been working through that, but I guess when I get home, it's going to be much nicer. So 60s, 70 degrees, so much more typical of fall in Colorado. So we're ready for that.
Well, let me tell you one thing. I was telling my wife that last night it was raining. I mean, but it's still, this is Southeast Florida. So it was raining and the temperature was 74. That is the first time I see 74 since June.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That felt pretty nice. Did you put a jacket on or?
Well, it was extremely humid. It was 74, yeah, but 96% humidity. It was horrible.
No, thank you. No, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
but nice to see you. Good to have you here this morning. Always glad to see your face here on the chat. So one of the things that I always like to do is jump ahead with the topic, but as Ryan knows, because he's joined us here as well, is we have a ceremonial drink of your favorite
Yes.
beverage here. And I used to say in the morning, but we get people from all around the world who join us. So please take your favorite beverage. I have coffee. Jose has his tea. The beautiful Homewood Sweets coffee.
Yeah.
Not too bad, really. Which is kind of a nice, segue into our topic for today, because we're talking about something that I think, really, it gets not the attention, the attention it should deserve, and that's food quality, right? We're always talking about food safety and recalls and listeria and allergens and things like that, but food quality is as important, if not more important, because if you're not meeting the needs of your consumer, you're not going to be selling any product.
Done.
Yeah.
Yep. Bryan, and you know what? Everything goes back again to the requirements. Okay. And you know that besides, of course, I'm 100% certification and following whatever it is, DRC, SUF, IFS, FSSC, and I don't care. We need to make sure that those programs are also in compliance with the regulation.
Yes.
So in this case, what I'm going to start this conversation is that we need to remember the definition of the word adulteration, okay, by the FDA. And adulteration is whenever someone works under insanitary conditions, okay, what is in sanitary conditions. What will happen to the product if we are working under insanitary conditions? And the same statement says the product may get adulterated with a hazard that will cause illness or injury, number one. And number two, the product may get adulterated with filth. And when you say filth, there is another section in the definition of adulteration in the law that says that if the product, for whatever reason, is unfit for food, the product is adulterated.
Yeah.
So looking at all of those definitions, if the product is decomposed, the product is adulterated. If the product contains something that is not part of the specification of that product, the product is adulterated.
Right.
If the product is not coming from the country of origin, it's kind of a fraud in, oh, I'm buying some crab legs from Alaska and the product is coming from a different region, the product is adulterated.
Right.
So adulteration is most likely related to, in my opinion, matching the product with its own specifications. If everything in the specification matches the product, we're fine.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, right? Because and that's a good frame, right? And you'll notice here, this is what Jose does, which I always love, is he always brings it back to the base. And the base is those two pillars that FDA always looks at: adulteration and misbranding, right? Because, and within FDA's recall program, right, they have levels of recalls, 1, 2, and 3, right? 1s are serious, 2s are, okay, this is a potential issue, and 3 is, this is something that consumers know about. So you can kind of think of that scale as food safety and food quality, because we do see recalls for product that is adulterated, but is not necessarily human threat. So for example, there's small pieces of rubber in the product, right? And the company does not want that out in the market. It's not going to hurt anybody, but it's not what is acceptable. And so they will initiate the recall process, even though it's not a food safety threat. And you'll see those kind of mixed in with the other ones.
And you know what, Bryan, one thing that I found that is a connection between the requirements of the recall program, according to the new preventive controls, and the definition of adulteration is that in recalls, we have three classifications, 3 classes of recalls. Okay. Class 1, that the product contains a hazard, and it is likely that people die from that.
Yeah.
Class 2, the product contains a hazard, but death is not likely. Okay. And then class 3 is not for hazards. So now you can connect the definition of adulteration in the law with the classification of the recalls, because a class 3 recall is something that the product is unfit for food, the product is filthy, the product is decomposed, but it's not going to cause illness or injury.
Correct. Yeah, I had an issue with a company I worked with in the past, and it was a sister company, and they had forgot to correctly label an allergen on the packaging, but the allergen was pictured on the label of the product and all of these type of things. And we went to FDA and said, oh, we found this mistake and this product's in the marketplace, and we explained everything to FDA. And normally, right, you would say an allergen is a class 1 recall, but FDA looked at what we had and the information that was being conveyed to the consumer and said, this we're going to classify this as a class 2. And so the recall of that product was handled that way. So part of this, right, is being able to explain the context to FDA to help them, because remember this, FDA determines the classification. You don't, right? You bring them the information and they decide.
Yep.
I see that Austin's having some troubles with the live stream. Hopefully, everything's looking good on my side. Jose, everything looking good for you. Yep. Hopefully everybody else is having a good stream here too. Hopefully it's not my remote location here, but we'll continue forging forward. So one of the things, and the standards, FSSE and all these standards that you talked about, Jose, right, they have different standards because they recognize with this regulatory framework that there's food safety, right? Food safety, and there's food quality. And looks like Robert's having some trouble too as well. Hopefully everything works, guys. Fingers crossed here. And with that, you can get certified to 2 different standards. Now, normal process that companies go through is you get certified to food safety. And then the next level is food quality. And I don't know, it's been my experience, right, that a lot of companies don't necessarily go with that quality standard. What do you see, Jose?
Okay, so I mean, the way that we started our conversation, Brian, what when you decide to make a food product, you need to make sure that the product matches certain characteristics, which is exactly most likely what most of the consumers wish to have. Most. You're going to have a lot of people that they just don't like your product.
Right.
Okay. And that's fine. And that's okay. But somehow, what we need to make sure is that our product matches whatever other specifications. And you cannot develop a specification saying, my product is chicken and my product is going to be very safe. And that's it. You need to provide some specifications about the texture, the color, the shape, the size, the weight, or something. And those are things that are not hazards.
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
So you may have, and this is something, I'm going to use this example. This is something that I've been using when I'm teaching these classes. Let's say that you want to produce bread. Okay, so fine, we have a bakery. We're going to make some dough. We're going to cook it, and we're going to make some bread. But then we decide we are going to make the safest bread on the face of the earth. I'm going to set up the oven to 500 degrees, and I'm going to leave the bread there for 2 hours. What you're going to take out of that oven is extremely safe.
Yeah.
Nothing is going to leave there. Okay. However, nobody can eat it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so you need to understand, right? It gets back to the example I use quite a bit is coffee, right? So I have an expectation for the coffee I make at home, and it's higher than the coffee I expect at the hotel, right? If the coffee at the hotel is reasonably drinkable, I'm okay. I'm not going to complain. I'm not going to go to the front desk and say, hey, this coffee you brewed 12 hours ago isn't a perfect cappuccino, espresso, whatever. No, that's an unrealistic expectation. So that's a big part of quality is understanding what's going on.
Yeah, understanding the quality characteristics of any food. So we start this process of manufacturing by defining, I'm going to say first, the quality of the product. And kind of as a second, say, okay, we need to make this safe. But I mean, we are so used to deal with the FDA and with the standards and so on that we always look at food safety. But at the end, I mean, your product could be very safe. If you don't have the right quality, you're not going to sell the product.
Yeah. I've noticed here too that like a couple of other people are having issues as well. So apologies for that, guys. We're going to keep going ahead on this. And what I'm going to do is on locals, when I download this, I'm going to put this up on locals as well. And so the broadcast looks great on our side. So hopefully, fingers crossed, the quality of this broadcast is good, and you'll be able to view it there. So at locals.com, if you look up Bryan Armentrout, and that's with a Y, you'll be able to find the locals account and be able, sign up. It's free to join, right? And this information will be there. So hopefully that will work. So back to the topic. So with quality, right, we have our own internal specifications, right? And that's not quality, right? So for example, if you have a pH specification on a product, oh, well, my pH is between, 5.5 and 7.2 on the finished product. Great, that's your spec. I'd never had a consumer complain to me, Jose, and come to me and say, oh, hey, I tasted your drink and I think your pH is out of spec. No, right? They say this tastes weird, right?
Yeah. and Bryan, quality in many cases is very subjective.
Yes. But I mean, with that, right, it's very, very important in quality to remember and never forget. And this is if you figure this out and you're able to do this in your company, this is a good takeaway from today. If you're able to be the voice of the consumer within your company and remind people of that, your position is going to be really well regarded, right? Because understanding what the consumer values in that product and what they determine as acceptable and not acceptable is what matters for quality, not what you think internal. And I kind of refer to this as navel gazing, right? So within food companies, right, you have a lot of highly technical people who will taste this coffee, right? I mean, look at the palette of coffee tasters in companies, right? You know, they're evaluating acidity and bitterness and astringency and aftertaste and flecking of the creamer and you name this long laundry list of attributes with coffee. And then they give it a score and all these type of things, and they're looking at it, doing a technical review. The idea of that is if some problems are developing ahead of time, you can pick them up. And so the idea is to find out what those are before the consumer picks them up, which begs the question, what are those consumer attributes? And so for me, as we talked about, one of my key drivers, and we'll talk about it a little bit more, is bitterness. Right? If I have a coffee that's bitter, no, I don't like that. I don't buy dark roast coffees. They tend to be much more bitter. And that's fine. There's other people who like that. But that's my understanding, right? And so that's kind of the difficulty with quality, because you're looking at a large data set with all kinds of different people, with all kinds of different opinions and all different kinds of likes, right? And people don't taste the same. I would, much to my shame, I would try out for quality panels, tasting panels within food companies, and they give you triangle tests and things like this to see how good you are at sensory. I would fail.
Me too.
It's like, okay, I don't have enough, little taste buds, on my tongue to determine some of the things that they're looking for, and that's fine, right? But a lot of consumers are like that too, so you need to remember those things. If you get too internally focused, what can happen then is you are then making decisions based upon that. And this is where you see companies come out with new and improved, right? If you're around our age, we remember New Coke, right? Oh, the new Coke, everything is one. And people taste it and they're like, this is awful. No, this is not Coke. But everything internal within the company said, this is the next new thing and this is going to be great. One of the messages I always beat into the heads of my quality teams around this topic is consumers hate change, right? That's why companies like McDonald's are so popular. It doesn't matter if McDonald's is making the best burger in the world. McDonald's is making the same burger in the world, right? Yeah. And when I go there and spend a little bit of money buying the meal package or whatever, I know exactly what I'm getting. And that's really, really hard to do. Yeah. And understanding that is key. And change, companies don't like to hear it in this capacity. Change is not necessarily a good thing because the consumers probably aren't going to agree with you.
And you know what, to your topic, Bryan. So I'm going to use a real example. So and most of the people, I guess, here know that I love to, drive my mountain bike in Florida without mountains, but, man-made. So there is a drink that I really like. It's a very good protein source. Taste has a chocolate taste, and I really like it. So at some point, I went out trying to buy the drink, and I was not able to find it. When I said I'm going online, purchase that online, and have that shipped to my house. When I did that, I was able to find the reviews, and I was able to find that some people hate the taste. They say your product tastes horrible, and I said, what these guys are doing? Are they tasting something different than me? No, actually, that is a reality. There are some people that will like your product, some people that will not like your product, no matter what is the quality. Your product might be matching your specification perfectly. Some people will like it, some people will not.
Right.
On a regular basis, we keep track of customer complaints for food safety. We should also be tracking complaints of quality. You know what? Because if you have, at some point, you design a product, you create the product, you manufacture and you ship the product, and then you start receiving huge amount of complaints because of the color, of the taste, texture, or whatever that is the quality of your product, you should be, remaking your product, or at least creating another version of the same product because of quality reasons.
Exactly. And you have to be very, very careful with that, because if you start getting, let's say, texture complaints, you're like, oh, we're getting texture complaints, and you change the texture. Now the people who weren't complaining are saying, ah, you changed your texture. Now you're getting complaints from them, right? So
Yes.
you have to be very, very careful and very understanding of how this
Yep.
works. One of the things, Jose, I mean, so Annie had a great observation here, is that she got this from Kurt Dybel, right? Great guy. Is quality is when you turn the customer away, 100%, right? So what I would tell my quality managers is there's three buckets of data that you're going to be managing. There's operational data that the plant collects. So, pounds per man hour and electrical usage and turnover of employees and all these type of things. Important for the plant manager to measure and run the plant. But from a quality standpoint, not important. Food quality is those attributes and things that you're measuring in this capacity. And you need to gather the data that allows the plant to make a decision, a business decision on whether or not something is acceptable. And that standard is always not you, it's the consumer, right? And
Mm-hmm.
the third bucket, of course, is food safety. And food safety is easy, right? If there's a food safety issue, well, right, it's yes or no, right? If either you have a food safety issue or you don't. Food safety issue, recall, right? Or destroy the product if you still have it in your possession, right? That's easy. Food quality is a business decision, and we need to provide that data to the organization.
Yep. Yeah. And to your point, and to Annie's comment here, I agree. Quality is what turns the customer away, but not having the right safety, we're killing the customers.
Right.
So many cases, it's bad.
Right. Yeah. Food safety is assumed, right? When I didn't review the SQF certification or anything for these coffee beans before I drank it. It's assumed to be safe, right? The
Yeah.
quality is not, right? I make an evaluation of that.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
well, and it's this, I've seen this more than in one company that I've worked for, and it would drive me insane.
Mhm.
So we would do corporate product cuttings, and you would take out all kinds of, let's say, cheese, right? Samples of cheese that the plants are making, and you're having a big showing at corporate, and all the marketing people show up, and the sales people show up, and the CEO shows up, and everybody's eating the cheese, and then the CEO declares, "This is good cheese." Based on what?
Yeah.
I don't care, right? That's your personal opinion. But if we are going to run our company based on your personal opinion, we're going to fail, right? Don't confuse those, because a lot of times too, if a CEO does that, everybody else is now scared to speak up because the
Yeah.
CEO has now declared that this is good.
And by the way, that depends on the culture of the company. If you have
Yeah.
an open culture where everybody can say whatever they wish, just as a, and there is no uh, risk of retaliation because of a different opinion, that is
Yeah.
very good.
Yeah. Well,
And that
but
is
this
part of
thing,
the
right?
food safety culture.
Let's say, for example, that you're in charge of sales and you are responsible for selling a new product and it's not going well, right? You have a bias now. You're going to go to the cutting and say, "Oh, this is terrible. This is terrible product. This is, well, no wonder I can't sell the cheese because it's so awful and terrible," right? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe that salesperson is protecting his team,
Maybe.
right?
Yeah.
So you have to be careful for those things. So be very, very wary if you're making product decisions internally and not speaking for the consumer. That's the point we're trying to make there.
Yeah, because
So
it's based on opinions, and many different people may have different opinions.
yeah, absolutely. And you need to build out what Jose talked about earlier, which is your specifications and understanding those. And far too often within companies, you'll see a spec that has all of the technical data, right? So micro, chemical, these type of things. And then it gets to organoleptic, and it'll say something like pleasing flavor with no off notes. Okay, based on what? Who's tasting? Maybe to your point, maybe somebody likes it, somebody doesn't. As Austin says, maybe he doesn't like the high cocoa content chocolate, but his wife does. So, right, you have to be really, really careful about that and train those people making those observations. I worked at a company where we had like a cream cheese product, and internally, we knew that consumers would complain in one of two buckets for texture. if the cheese was too hard or if it was too soft, because it was going on crackers. It was like for a party dip.
Yes.
And we worked very, very hard with the operators on the line to teach them how the texture of the product should be coming off the line. And if they saw anything that deviated from that, they would come and let us know, and then we would do further investigation. Oh, that worked incredibly well. And it was simple, right?
Oh.
Because part of this is we have to understand that not everything that we do in quality is measurable.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to say, right? Because we're data people, but it's true.
Yeah, but you know what? Whenever you have something that is analog and not digital, yeah, you can still have ranges, you know? Right. And then if I grab, I don't know, I'm going to use some statistics here because I cannot help it. If you grab 10 crackers and you run them through the cheese and they don't break, that's your test.
Yeah, exactly. And in that same example, right, for that same product, we had like a wraparound sleeve around this product. And sometimes the machine would get a little bit of alignment on the bottom that the glue would not be quite aligned correctly. And we had all kinds of instructions up there of how this needs to be done and what it needs to look like and stuff like this. And I started looking at that and I'm like, okay, if it's glued and it's holding, that's what we want. Have I ever received a complaint from a consumer saying that, hey, you know, this package on the bottom here is a little bit out of alignment? No, never. So why are we stressing so much about this?
Yeah. It still is a democracy. So you don't need to be 100% accurate on something.
Yeah. It's like that old saying, right? We could make a perfect product, right? Every attribute is just amazing, right? And it costs $500. No one's going to buy it. So what's the point?
Yeah.
Right. So how you measure quality is very, very important. And those specifications, your internal viewpoint, but getting that external viewpoint, right? Don't just rely on R&D and the marketing groups to do this. Can you set up quality questionnaires and quality surveys to get information directly from the consumer? Super important. I worked with a company in the past that did this. One of the best tools I ever had. Oh my goodness. And we would ask consumers only quality questions. It's like, and it was very, very deliberately designed. And coming out of these surveys of quality, I knew exactly what the leading drivers of complaints were. I knew what the average score was. I know what the age of the product when they were eating it was. And I knew what the shelf life could be. And I had this beautiful graph that would show the consumer scores, and then it would fall off a cliff when it reached the end of shelf life when the product started going bad. And it was the best tool because sales, you know, let's say that product was moving slowly and sales would come to me and say, you know, I just need 5 more days of shelf life, Bryan, to be able to sell this product and make money. Can we extend the shelf life 5 days, right? And I would pull up that graph and be like, no, absolutely. Here's what that score is going to do if we have that consumer, if it's in the marketplace 5 more days. Yeah. If we need to redo the product, let's talk with R&D and start a project on how we can extend shelf life and have a good product. But what we're doing now, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And once the salespeople saw that, they understood too, right? Because they want good product too.
Yeah. And now look at this, Bryan. Without potentially an intention, what we're doing right now is talking about the culture of the company again. Because sales and marketing, they need to understand what they are selling. And what they're selling is not whatever is in their mind, is whatever is in the specification of the product.
Right. And that's a good observation, Jose, because we're always talking about food safety culture, but there's also a food quality culture.
Of course.
It'll be interesting to see if that comes to light one day.
You know what? And I will not separate that, Bryan, because, oh my goodness, the culture is to manufacture the product exactly according to its own specifications, quality and safety, period.
Yep, absolutely. So coming out of this, you need to have a clear understanding as a quality professional from the viewpoint of the consumer. As an overall market for your product, what are the leading drivers? What are the things that if you screw it up, the consumers are going to say, oh, right? Because remember, most people don't complain, right? They just taste something and say, oh my goodness, that's awful, and they leave and they go somewhere else, right? Very few people actually bother to, go in and write a complaint. So you have to be very, very careful. And let's say, for example, like with bitterness in your coffee, right? If I'm the quality manager at the coffee roasting company, I'm going to be watching for bitterness like crazy, right?
Yeah.
I want to make sure that that is correct every single time. And if there's any doubt that bitterness is present, that goes on hold. That is
Yep.
not going out, right?
Yep.
And if people come back and say, it's not too bad, no, right? Because that's how quality degrades, right? It's never one giant thing, Jose. It's little changes over time.
Yes.
And it gets to a point where the consumer tastes it and says, whoa, what is this? This is
Yeah.
not what I buy. No, I'm going somewhere else. And you're done. Right?
And Brian, to your point again, the specification of that coffee should say bitterness, and you define whatever is the metric that is going to be used to determine that. You define that. And as long as there is measurement of each and every single lot that is being produced of the bitterness, and you are actually verifying that you are within X range, you are fine. But one thing, you need to define which are the parameters that are critical for that product.
Yes.
And that is going to be part of the specification. So going back to the specification thing, so for coffee, maybe bitterness. Maybe you are producing coffee and you are producing tea. Now, are you going to use bitterness for the tea? Most likely not.
No.
So each and every single product will have its own characteristics for quality.
Right. And if your company is, and if your company is smart, the marketing people will use that in their campaign.
Yeah. Right? And that's why marketing and sales, they need to be part not only of the, I don't want to say food safety team, but I prefer to say the culture of the company. Everybody together looking to push the right product outside of the door.
Right. And this is where the data comes in, right? Because now you're not talking about single point issues like food safety. You're talking about large buckets of data. And you need to figure out the best way to report that out. So one of my pieces of advice on that is you have to be careful when you're setting up your standards and your specifications and you're reporting on those within the company to not have too many categories. The goal is to kind of be in that Goldilocks range, right? So for me, for quality attributes, it was generally around, if you have more than 6, it's probably too much, right? So if you're looking at product deviations, it would be like micro, chemistry, damage, flavor, sensory, whatever those issues are. But if you start subcategorizing those because you think that's going to give you better data, actually it tends to dilute it, because now your complaint rates go down and everybody goes, everything is fine because you have 50 categories with only one complaint.
And you know what, Brian? Again, to your point, my goodness, why not using the same approach of the risk analysis? You may use anything. You can use the hazard-based approach. Yeah, it's a risk assessment technique, but you can use many other techniques. And if you do that, you are going to naturally find that you are going to find maybe 3 or 4, maybe only 1, maybe 2 parameters that are critical for each and every single product, but not everything is critical.
Right, absolutely. And so sometimes companies get sucked into that. Now, part of this too within the company is when you're looking at how do I set up and manage quality, let's say in a production facility, the big mistake is looking at finished product quality, because guess what? What can you do about that? It's done, right?
It's done.
You have to figure out where in my process can I actually do something about this, right? So we'll stick with the beverage example. So let's say that you're making a plant-based beverage, right? And you have a batching system and you're adding water and you're adding in soy base and flavors and all kinds of good stuff, right? That's the point in time where you can do something about it, because once it goes into the system and gets pasteurized and packaged, it is what it is. So that's the point in time for your quality standards to be able to look at that, right? So pull a sample and bring it to the lab. Now, it may be a food safety risk, right? If it's unpasteurized, so don't drink it, right? But what other tests can you do? Can you do smell tests? Can you do color tests and things like this? There may be a problem in the system that you don't know about. Let's say you have a plate heat exchanger that's warming it up for batching. and it hasn't been cleaned in a while, and it's producing burned product, right? So now you smell it, and you're like, oh, that smells burnt, right? Now you can do something about it, right? It's like, okay, let's pull more samples from this batch. Ooh, yeah, okay, no, dump that batch. We're not even going to package that.
Yep.
Because, right, quality, kind of the rule of thumb in quality is for every major step in your process, right, receiving, packaging, processing, and warehouse, every step that you go through, you're 10xing the cost of the mistake.
Yes. Yep.
So catch that cost early and set it up for success.
Yeah. Like, hey, Bryan, this is very similar, like having specifications for the product at each step of the process.
Yeah.
As long as you comply with that, that's exactly what you are saying right now.
Yep. Here's our batch spec. And our batch spec includes consumer attributes.
Yep.
Yep. If texture is important, that's the point in time where you're doing rheometry or something like that, right?
Yeah.
When you can actually do something about it.
Yep.
So part of what I want to talk about here too is something that I see, and I'm curious about this for you as well. One of the mistakes I see in systems, and this is more of a regulatory strategy, but I wanted to give people this tip to think about, is for your documentation in your quality system, and this is kind of weird to say, but don't mix them, right? Keep your food safety documentation and your food quality documentation separate. Why? Because when FDA comes in, they want to see the food safety information. They don't care about the food quality information. So why would you show it to them? But what happens in plants, so let's take the filling machine that we've been talking about. So let's say that the filling machine, you have quality attributes, right? So you have weight of the product and seal on the package and case count, whatever it is within there. And you also have, let's say, metal detector check, right? So you have food quality and food safety information. And let's say that during production, the machine goes down and maintenance has to fix a sealer or something like this. And the machine's down for 4 hours. And then it starts back up. And FDA comes in a month later to review your food safety documentation. And they notice on that form that your machine was down for a quality reason for 4 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're going to start asking questions. Whoa, you were down. How do you know that bacteria weren't going? How did you know that? Fill in the blank, right? Now you're going to ask a bunch of questions with FDA that you may not have had to have asked in the first place. Now, internally, you should have standards of, okay, if the machine is down for this period of time, yep, we CIP and we clean everything and we don't want to do that, right? But that's your decision, right? So make sure to have your documentation clear and easy to follow for the people that you're targeting it to. So don't combine stuff.
I mean, I fundamentally agree with you because you have a very good point. Having the FDA checking documentation related to food safety and food quality at the same time, that may eventually confuse them. It's a possibility. Now, from systems standpoint, Bryan, I believe that is maybe not that good of idea because at the end, if we need to comply with the product specifications, which is one piece of paper, all the activities that we perform for food safety and food quality are going to be there. Mm-hmm. And in systems, my biggest concern is that in systems, the definition of a system is a group of elements that are working interrelated and are interacting. Okay. Right. With that definition in mind, this is in ISO 9000. With that definition in mind, what is the problem? That if we keep two separated systems, that is what I'm going to be observing at the beginning. If you have two separated systems and there is a potential, I'm going to say, deviation from whatever is the process for quality, that it is possible that may impact food safety or otherwise. Okay, right. That's one of the things that I will evaluate if you separate those programs. How can I determine when I'm having a deviation here, which are the other elements that might be affected by this deviation?
No, that's a very good point. And so really, I mean, all I'm really saying, there's a reason why. So for example, like standards like SQF or whatever, have different guidances and different certification for the different standards, right? Because you're focused on different things. They all fall under the same umbrella. All I'm really saying here, and to your point, right, there's nothing you said that I don't disagree. I don't disagree with anything you said. Every company is unique, and everything needs a separate evaluation. It's just that you need to understand how you present that information to your target audience, right? So just a little something to think about. And part of that too, part of what we learn in quality and how we grow is through our mistakes, right? And so when I talk about this subject, it's from personal pain, right? I had an issue that shouldn't have been an issue, but FDA saw it and made it into an issue.
Yeah. And we learn from that. Actually,
Yeah,
those are the best lessons.
I mean, pretty much through my career, that's what I've found is the only way I've learned is by doing things wrong and then knowing that's not how to do them. So, I mean, really, this kind of gets back then around kind of our last topic for this, Jose, which was if you want to start putting together a quality program, is understanding mandatory and voluntary requirements and how those things are managed, and how do you deal with that, right? So you need to look at your documents and figure out how to organize those, because odds are those documents are already there. So if you're doing that, make sure that you understand that and start organizing them around food safety and food quality. On my side here, Jose has frozen, but I'm going to keep going here, hoping that his connection reconnects and that he can hear me. And if not, we'll just continue on and catch Jose up. So you need to look at your documents, and this is something that I always recommend, right? Is you need to organize your documents and understand how those documents work in terms of the context of your food safety and your food quality systems, and looking at those and saying, how do I organize those? This is extremely important to figure out those type of things. Because in the end, quality certification is just as important as food safety certification. As we talked about in the beginning, food safety, guys, is something that is a given. Right? It is something that the consumer expects. It's something that everybody anticipates. Food quality is much more variable. And therefore, as a quality person, it's harder to manage because the data you're looking at is dealing with much larger sets, and you have to figure out ways of how you can evaluate that. So hopefully here today, we've given you some good strategies on how to manage that. So we'll see if Jose is able to rejoin us. I know we've had trouble with the connections here, and so I appreciate everybody kind of sticking through on this. Again, I'll be uploading this to Locals and putting this on locals.com, and we'll hopefully then have a replay of this. I am back in the office here next week, so I'll have a nice steady connection and not a hotel connection type thing. But hopefully you found some value out of this. Please give me some comments on this and feedback on information that you have relative to this. And I will see you back here next Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain Time in Colorado, 10 a.m. Eastern for the next food safety chat. And please, if there's topics you would like me to talk about here on the chat, or you have guests who would like to come on, or if you would like to be a guest, that would be awesome, right? So drop me a note here at Armentrout@foodleadership.com, and we'll see what you got, right? So everybody, thank you again for being here. This is an hour of your time that you could have been doing other things, but you've invested it in career growth and getting new perspectives on how to do things, and I really appreciate that. So we'll see you back here next weekend, and have a great one. Thanks, everybody, and we'll talk soon.